What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Out of Mana. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different and talking about where I was wrong, because I think it's important to look back and see where we might have made mistakes. And in this case, I'm going to be looking at cards that I thought would be fantastic but are maybe okay or terrible, and cards that I thought that wouldn't be very good but are actually pretty strong. I found 11 cards that I think I was pretty off on. I'm also curious as to which cards you think you were wrong about, so leave those in the comments down below. Of course, if you want to show some support, you can also leave a like and subscribe. You can check out my Patreon like all of these people over here, and you can check out the Discord in the description to join us and talk about videos and give your input on them in the future, to build decks together, or to just hang out and play games. So starting things off, we're going to go with Taric Protector. This is a 4 energy and 1 power unit in Calm for 4 might, and it has both shield and tank, and gives other units that you have here shield as well. So I thought that this would be a pretty solid defensive option. However, green doesn't really facilitate having a lot of creatures on the field at once. In fact, in most cases, you almost want to have just one big creature in a spot in most Calm decks. Ahri kind of does this, Master Yi almost exclusively does this. Leona and Lee Sin are kind of mixed bags, although I would say that in general they're more offensive than defensive decks, so you're not too worried about giving your units shield. I think this might have a place as we see more about Azir, because he'll be generating a lot of tokens, and the more tokens you have, the easier it is to get Taric to go off. But even so, I think I just really missed the mark on how slow this card would be, and how the speed of the game would affect how viable this card is. Next up, we have a card I actually really like and put in a lot of my purple decks, and that is Scrapheap. So this is 2 energy for a gear that says when it's played, discarded, or killed, you can draw a card. So I thought that this would be an okay card. I didn't think it would be anything particularly special. However, there are so many ways to proc this in purple specifically. You have the Traveling Merchant, you have the Inverted Timelines, you have the Battlefield for Zaun even. And even if there's not a ton of cards, and yes, you could pair it with red for even more, but even if there's not a ton of cards, this ends up being really effective because of how easy it is to proc those effects in purple. There are movement effects like Fight or Flight, or Ride the Wind, or Tide Turner, which you can combo with Cycling Merchant to cycle a card multiple times a turn, or even on your opponent's turn. And you can just stockpile these things up and then use Inverted Timelines to discard 2 or 3 of them, and like that's a huge turn for you. And even in the very worst case scenario, this is just a 2 energy draw a card, and if it gets destroyed later, you're also going to draw a card. And you can do that in a red and purple deck with Thermo Beam, as that destroys all equipment. You could do it in just purple with acceptable losses. I think I missed how flexible this card would be. I always thought it would be okay. I mean, like, it's just Upstart Goblin. It's almost a free draw. But where I missed the mark is how much synergy it would have in non-Jinx decks. And I think that's what makes it really good. Now, on the other hand, I thought Nocturne would be a lot better. Before I really looked at the card pool, I thought the idea of getting a unit from the top of your deck essentially free is fantastic. And yeah, if you can pull it off, like especially in the early turns, that is almost a free win sometimes. Where this gets a little bit tricky is that there's no real efficient way to actually proc this. Yes, you have the Teemo Strategist, which looks at the top 5 cards. That's not a bad one. But outside of that, you have like the Battlefield, Candlelit Sanctum. That's okay. You have Stacked Deck, which is, I'd say, the only really good card for actually proccing this. And then you have some of the Vision cards like the Mystic, Poro, and Karma. The problem is, Vision doesn't really do anything outside of Nocturne and correcting your deck, obviously. So while Nocturne is a really powerful and cool card, there's just not an efficient way to enable him, and there's not enough synergy or redundancy with his effect that it's worth running. Even when we get Rek'Sai in the next set, she doesn't have purple in her colors, so we can't enable this. Now her support cards might enable this in like a red and purple deck, and then we might see that Nocturne moves away from the blue and purple combo. Of course, that means that we lose Teemo in that, but sure, that's fine. But I just think that we need some level of making a more consistent payoff, and then Nocturne could be really strong. Until then, though, he's just kind of a high roll card, and like it's great if you get him. If not, eh. Next, we have a card that I think I overvalued a little bit. I thought that Mystic Reversal would be in every green deck as at least a 1-of. However, the way it shook out is that it's maybe sometimes a sideboard piece. It very rarely makes the main deck. For those who don't know, this is a 4 energy card that costs 3 green power, and at reaction speed you can gain control of a spell and choose a new target if you want. So, if your opponent uses Time Warp, or Icathian Rain, or Singularity, any of that big stuff, this is like just game winning. You win on the spot. However, the cost of recycling 3 runes is quite a lot, and until they cast those big spells, this can sometimes feel like a dead card in your hand. You don't want to use this on a Stupefy, right? Again, this is a very strong card. I would even say it's a good card. I just think it's hard to fit into the deck with the current way that we have things set up. In the future, especially as we see things like the gold gear being present, this might be more possible as we're not relying on recycling runes, and we can actually get ahead on the board as well without putting ourselves too far behind. So I do have hope for Mystic Reversal in future sets, but currently it's like a perfect example of a very strong card that's just fine because of the way that the meta and the card pool that we have available kind of shakes out. Alright, bit of a silly one with Mega-Mech. This is a 7 energy, 8 might unit. That's it. But as it turns out, having a big unit that you don't have to pay power for is pretty solid, actually. It allows you to work towards your bigger cards, like Time Warp in blue, without putting yourself back, and helps you build a strong presence on the board without putting yourself behind. On top of that, 8 is just a really good number to have. When it comes to removal in this game, a lot of the times what you have to worry about are things like Falling Star, Singularity, Void Seeker, or Hextech Ray. And yes, that's all in red and blue, but Kai'Sa's very popular. But how do those cards stack up into Mega-Mech? Well, Falling Star doesn't do it. It only gets to 6, and that still leaves him at 2 health. You need 2 Void Seekers to kill him. You need Singularity and any other spell to kill him. It's just at a health total that makes it difficult for a lot of other Kai'Sa decks to deal with, and that can often be make or break for allowing you to establish a board into them. Now obviously this is still just a vanilla beat stick, and as we get bigger units that have effects, this will be quickly rotated out, but it is just an example of sometimes having big stats is enough. And maybe when we see the Rumble deck, this might have a place in that as well, although I would imagine they want lower cost mechs in general there. Now another card I thought was going to be very strong, but ended up not really finding a home is Ekko. This is a 5 energy, 1 power unit for 5 might that has Accelerate and the Death Knell ability to recycle himself to ready all of your runes, effectively being a time warp on a unit, although it doesn't reset the battlefield so that you can get points from them again. So what this is really good at is actually removal, and I almost think of it like a Singularity, in that you can pay 6 and 2 power for him, swing him into a unit, deal your 5 damage, and then reset all of your runes and be able to cast all your other removal spells as well. And if you're not accelerating him in, you can always keep him in your base, and then the following turn you have kind of a double turn that time. The problem with Ekko is that it's a Death Knell ability, which means a lot of the times your opponent is going to have more control over when this activates than you do. And while getting extra energy on their turn could be great, it could also mean that you don't have access to being able to play things like Thousand Tail Watcher or Darius or whatever else for effectively free, and that's kind of a bummer. So I think Ekko will make a great spot in more defensive decks as we go forward, as well as things that can abuse Death Knells or that need high energy requirements. But again, right now, while it is an okay card and can let you do some silly stuff, it just has too many drawbacks. Alright, this is the embarrassing one. Dazzling Aurora. I thought that Dazzling Aurora would be okay. So this is a 9 energy, 2 power gear that at the end of your turn, reveal the top cards of your main deck until you find a unit, and then you can play it ignoring its costs and recycle the other ones that you saw. So the problem that I saw with this card is that it would be highly inconsistent, and that you'd have to build your deck in such a way that your opponent could basically overwhelm the board, get 5-6 points early on, and then even getting free units wouldn't be enough to help you catch up. And while that is true in a lot of situations, I might have underestimated the quality of units that Orange has access to, or the Aurora decks have access to in general. Because as it turns out, if you hit a Volibear or a Deadbloom Predator, or even a Mountain Dragon, they're really hard to get over if you're playing the wrong deck into them. In fact, as a Kai'Sa player, if someone gets a Dazzling Aurora off and I can't find an answer to it, it can feel impossible to get through some of their units, and that's really rough. And the other thing that I think really messed me up is that I overestimated the size of a 40 card deck. Because yes, Dazzling Aurora is pretty inconsistent, and if you don't draw it, you're going to have a rough time. But having 3 of them in 40 cards, or I guess 39 cards, makes it pretty likely that you'll actually see it fairly early on. Especially since you won't be able to play it for 2 or 3 turns anyways, it buys you enough time to find it. So yes, it is inconsistent, but if you can get it to go off, it can just win you the game on the spot, let alone if you have 2 of them going off. And on top of that, there's just not a lot of solutions for these cards once they're on the board outside of like yellow and kind of purple. Purple can bounce cards back to hands or push them back with fight or flight, and like that's fine, I guess. But yellow's really the only source of kill cards in the game, and just not a lot of decks that are relevant run yellow. Like sure, we have Sett and Viktor. Those might have like Hidden Blade or Call the Weak respectively. And like maybe there's an argument for Leona, but she's super not popular. Darius could also run them, but he's super not popular. So not only is this a game-winning and difficult effect to deal with, but the resources to deal with it are in places that people aren't often playing. And that's what makes this the meta-defining card that it is, to the point where everyone has to run Thermo Beam in their side deck or some kind of gear removal. Because if you don't, you just lose to these big bunguses. Now a unit that I think I'm probably biased about is Caitlyn. 3 energy and 1 power for 3 might, who has to be assigned damage last, so it's kind of the reverse of tank. And then you can exhaust her to deal damage equal to her might to a unit at a battlefield. And you can only do this while she's at a battlefield. So basically you're sniping units at the other battlefield, which is really cool. It's very fun. It's a playstyle that I like. The problem is, no green decks really want to do this right now. I've been testing it out in Leona and it's like fine-ish. In Ahri, it can be okay. Master Yi, again, But like all of those decks are fairly tight deck lists that want other things and more consistent things and more proactive things to do than just sit on a Caitlyn. Especially because when you play Caitlyn, she comes in exhausted and you can't use her ability. Then if you move her to a battlefield the next turn, also can't use her ability that turn. And then you have to hold that battlefield with Caitlyn on it and pass to your opponent, have them do their whole turn, go back to you, then you can hit something for 3 damage. And that's just too slow, I think. And that's often the case with a lot of these exhaust effects on units. They aren't proactive enough or fast enough to really make consistent value, and a lot of them have restrictions that make them difficult to deal with. And a lot of them even have restrictions that make them difficult to use, like Caitlyn being at a battlefield, or Heimerdinger needs other units to also have tap effects, or Malzahar needs gear that you can sacrifice. All of these are strong effects that just are too slow or need too much setup. So I do hope Caitlyn finds a place because, again, this is a playstyle I think is very fun. Set up walls and then just snipe people from across the board. But I'm not seeing it anytime soon. Now the last main deck card that I want to talk about is Ahri Alluring. This one's not too bad. I thought this would be an okay card, while the Inquisitive Ahri, the blue one, would be a lot better and more consistent because it is lower to the ground, its ability is easier to proc, and it's relevant every turn. And yeah, a lot of people do run Inquisitive, but a lot have started using Alluring as well, either in the sideboard or as the chosen champion, to help you deal with decks that are slower. This is actually a solution to the Dazzling Aurora deck in a lot of ways, as you combine this with the Arena's Greatest, and you're suddenly getting too many points for them to come in and get you with afterwards. If you're playing against a slow deck, this is a fantastic card, and I think I just undervalued it a little bit. I never thought that it would be a bad card, but I think inherently I might undervalue cards that have the hold effect, and because I also undervalued the Dazzling Aurora, I didn't see this really having a place in the current metagame, whereas it has a very solid place actually. And the last 2 cards that I wanted to talk about are actually battlefields, because they are pretty massively impactful on the game, and making sure that you understand how good they are is very important. So we're going to start with Vile Mausoleer, which just says that units that are there can't move back to their base. This stops a lot of hit and run kind of style of cards. Things like Kiana or Kaisa that want to keep conquering, so maybe they go in, they pull back, they go in over and over again. This limits their options of where they're able to move, because if they ever go here, they can't get away. It also makes it so that cards like Fight or Flight are less useful, while cards that target battlefields are more useful. They can no longer flash out if you have a Void Seeker or a Hextech Ray or anything that targets a battlefield, right? So this is very good at locking your opponents in place so that you can hit them. And the last thing that this is really effective with, which I didn't consider, is cards with ganking or the Misfortune Legend card, as they can bypass this effect by just going directly to the other battlefield without worrying about returning to base. So this actually has a lot of hidden synergies just by saying that people can't do one action, and I think that's extremely cool, but I definitely did miss it when I was looking at the card pool initially. And the last card that I want to take a look at is the Arena's Greatest, which starts every player at 1 extra point and works them towards getting that 8 just a little bit sooner. Again, this is a huge answer to any slow decks like Dazzling Aurora, because you're just outpacing them, and if you build your deck in a way that facilitates getting 7 points and really rushing the board, then you're in a spot to really take advantage of that faster game state while your opponent might not be in that spot. Again, a very simple effect, but it completely changes the pace of the game, and if you're building towards that, you're probably going to win. But those are the 11 cards that I pretty poorly judged when I first saw the card pool of this game. Let me know your thoughts, let me know which cards you got wrong, and if you made the same mistakes that I did. With all that being said though, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in tomorrow's video.